Hello and welcome once again to the Raging Introvert. A couple of days ago, my kids were watching this video on PBS, and I happened to be in their room and overheard most of it, and it kind of surprised me at some of the disinformation, logical fallacies that were put out. And of course, the kids don't want to listen to me because I'm not flashy infotainment with a bunch of graphics and things. I'm just a curmudgeon old white dude, so what do I know? So instead, I do what the Raging Introvert does, and make a video and publish it to the void, to the nothingness. Maybe I'll do it on November 4th with the protesters and just go out and scream at the sky like they do, just for different purposes. Regardless, we'll go through this little video and just point out some of the discrepancies and things that jumped out at me. It's short, so it's handy.
When I say cannibals, the image that comes to your mind probably isn't a group of white European settlers. Maybe it's because white European settlers would have found the idea of cannibalism abhorrent and would have avoided it at any cost. That's just my guess, but we'll see. Most images feature groups of darker-skinned natives deep in the wilderness, and if you've watched too many cartoons, they're probably dancing around a guy inside of a boiling pot.
And that would probably be because by the time the colonists were around and written records by Europeans were about, Caucasians and Europeans did not practice cannibalism, at least, again, not systemically or ritually, maybe in the most extreme, dire circumstances, but I don't know if it's a matter of life and death survival in an extreme event that should constitute cannibalism. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's look back at these images, because she's right. If it wasn't practiced, the records and images we'd have would be of dark-skinned people in the jungle, because those would be the only people left in the world committing cannibalism, right? If it's not the Caucasians in Europe, or where they've colonized, it would be the natives who would be dark-skinned by this point in time. Bata cannibals. Let's see. The Bata cannibals are from Sumatra, so that's in the Pacific, and as Pacific Islanders probably lived in a jungly environment, so that doesn't seem too out of place.
Darker-skinned natives deep in the...
Let's see. Island of Tanna and the New Hebrides. The New Hebrides is also in the Pacific. So dark-skinned islanders, a jungly environment. And in fact, let's take a look. Here's an article from the UK Telegraph talking about Vanuatu, which is the current name for the New Hebrides. Articles actually talking about local villagers talking about how historically they cooked humans for cannibalism. Most anthropologists agree that Vanuatu's last recorded cannibal killing was as recent as 1969. Well, okay, that's not too long ago. Let's scroll down. The islanders developed a reputation as fearsome cannibals. In 1839, the first two British missionaries to be dispatched from the London Missionary Society were promptly killed and eaten on Martyrs Island, now known as Aromango. The country is still profoundly traditional. Still, that means it was in the past, with 80% of people living in thatched hut villages and growing their food in tiny garden plots surrounded by jungle so green it looks as though the leaves are lit from within. So, dark-skinned people currently living in a very traditional setting. I would imagine back at the time of early Caucasian settlers from Europe, it would have been even more so. And if you watch this video, you'll see that these tribal people that they're representing, based off their clothing and their jewelry especially, are supposed to be African. And while their representation would certainly be considered culturally insensitive, African tribes some of them lived in jungle-type environments and conducted cannibalism. And also, this guy in the pot is a Caucasian door-to-door salesman who is incredibly stupid and annoying, And if you watch it, you're probably cheering for him to be eaten because, yeah, he deserves it.
But what you might not expect is that the myth of the savage cannibal played a...
All right, so the myth of the savage cannibal, that's our definition of terms, which I'll be interested to see because let's take a look at the actual definition. Here's the definition of cannibal. Noun, a person who eats human flesh, especially for magical or religious purposes, as among certain tribal peoples. Seems straightforward enough. And savage. Fierce is an adjective. Fierce, ferocious, or cruel, untamed, or uncivilized and barbarous. Probably the more appropriate one, applicable one for our purposes. And, in fact, to a early European colonist, settler, as they described, it would almost seem a redundant term, as anyone committing cannibalism would be viewed as uncivilized and barbarous. I suppose they could be looking at this too, fierce and ferocious, like maybe they violently attack people. So that's the raw definition of term. It'll be interesting to see what definition of terms, how she defines this term.
Crucial role in the colonization of the Americas and was repeated for centuries as justification for genocide and slavery.
Okay, so she's also going to show us how it was crucial for the colonization of the Americas and was used as justification for genocide and slavery. That part especially, I could even concede at this point that, yeah, slavery, religious differences, if you're going to be committing something like slavery, which is already morally abhorrent, or systematic genocide, not just conquering people, but deliberately trying to wipe out their race, yes, you could come up with all sorts of excuses, real or imagined, and savage cannibalism would fit that. The question is, was cannibalism real or not? Was it wholly invented, or was it have a basis in truth?
And who started this fear of rampant cannibalism? Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. I know it's edutainment or infotainment, however you want to do it, but this might be considered poisoning the well, maybe, or an ad hominem. When you draw the crazy eyes and mouth, you're already making him an object of ridicule and looking unreasonable instead of objectively showing him as such. So this is not the most objective way of starting the discussion off. Oh, wait,
now,
hold on, I didn't even see that before.
Pretty big...
The raised power fist. I don't know if that's supposed to represent Black Lives Matter or the communist workers of the world. Whatever it is, the raised fist is usually, at least in my mind, not a positive symbol to associate with anything. But I suppose that's just me.
Now, I just laid out a pretty big claim that the myth of cannibals had a major impact on the colonization of the New World.
And that it was rooted in Christopher Columbus's description of natives in the Caribbean. And I think the quote is, "Great claims require great evidence," so I look forward to seeing yours.
But is that actually true? Well, the first and most obvious part of this question seems to be, does cannibalism actually exist as a practice?
Oh, I know the answer to this one. The answer to this one is yes, definitely. All across the world, throughout human history. In fact, if we look at the video, they have a series of links to all sorts of articles and all the references for the information they present. Let's look at some of those now. This article talks about how human meat, just another meal for early Europeans, showing how cannibalism helped meet protein needs, keep rivals in line, how it was widespread among early Europeans. That's good. Interesting, another article in National Geographic showing cannibalism study finds people are not that nutritious, but while our ancestors did practice cannibalism, eating other humans just couldn't compare with taking down a mammoth. Well, that's reasonable. A mammoth certainly is more filling than a human. But, yeah, humans did eat other humans, according to this. Further down the article, Archaeologists have found evidence of cannibalism in the human family tree at least as far back as 800,000 years. Butchered human parts appear in layers in the cave spanning about 100,000 years, suggesting the practice occurred somewhat regularly. So that's interesting. Let's see what else we have. I linked the Encyclopedia Britannica, term derived from the Spanish name for the Carib, West Indies, so Caribbean tribe. A widespread custom going back into early human history. Cannibalism is found among peoples on most continents. Okay, so widespread. And this other linked article they had, Cannibalism Normal for Early Humans. This article talks about how there's evidence that's been put forward that humans have a genetic marker for resistance to prion diseases. Prions, it says here, from eating human flesh. My understanding is, it's mostly diseases of the brain from eating other brains, so eating human brains. And in fact, there are some cannibal tribes in existence today, to this day, that suffer from prion diseases and similar things because they still eat, whether for nutritional needs or for ritual needs is kind of irrelevant. They eat human brains and suffer from this. Oddly, this article I found was not one of the articles referenced in the PBS video. Carib Cannibalism, the historical account by Neil Whitehead. And if we scroll down a bit, we'll see the article is actually divided into a Spanish part up above, because the author recognized that the Spanish accounts may have been tainted somewhat by their desire to enslave, take gold from, and wipe out the natives. But the English, French, and Dutch were not motivated to quite the same extent as the Spanish may have been, and their articles aren't as sensational, and their accounts don't focus so much on cannibalism. And if we scroll down a bit more, we'll come to an account from John Stedman. This is in 1796. He commanded Carib auxiliaries, so Carib tribesmen who were fighting against rebel blacks of Suriname. He says the Arawaks, another tribe in the Caribbean, no longer ate their prisoners by this time, unlike the Caribbean Indians, who even devoured the Negroes whom they killed at the insurrection in Berbice, and, quote, whose flesh they tear and devour with the avidity of wolves. And Bolingbroke, a contemporary of Stedman, and Bancroft, who's mentioned earlier, wrote that, quote, they only devour their enemies, and rather to satisfy their revenge than their hunger. So it may not have been a dietary nutritional need thing, but kind of in the definition above, either ritualistic or part of a religious ceremony. Also noting the endocannibalism of the Carib dead. Endocannibalism being when you eat the bodies of people of your own tribe or family. And let's see. Here's an account from a French Jesuit, Pellepret. One Arat, this is in Maine, South America, the mainland, not the Caribbean itself. One Arat came to me one day very kindly in a neighboring village where I was preparing the baptism of a Carib cacique, not sure what that is. Wishing to make me a presentation, which I took to be a personal gift, he passed me a basket in which there was the hand and foot of an Arawak, and then invited me to eat. I was horrified and told him that God is angered at those who eat their enemies. The obstacle of this basket and its contents were eventually overcome, and I will say no more. So it sounds like he was horrified at the cannibalistic practices of the natives. So let's see what she says.
Here's a quick review. In his book Cannibalism, A Perfectly Natural History, Bill Shutt notes that there are secondhand and anecdotal accounts from scholars that were...
Whoa, why would we go to second-hand and anecdotal accounts? We've got actual accounts, first-hand accounts from people in history. That seems a little strange.
Scholars that report instances of cannibalism around the world as part of various rituals and customs.
And from around the world, so it's widespread. That makes sense too. That's what the information seems to indicate.
as part of various rituals and customs, like funerals. And archaeologists think that prehistoric humans were eating people to meet protein demands and to kill off their enemies. But
I don't know why she says prehistoric. Most of the references we show, I mean, obviously it happened in prehistoric times as well, but we've got historic times with written accounts showing that it occurred. And yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense that, especially when food is scarce, that's been the standard for most of human history. Food is scarce, so if you've got a whole bunch of prisoners in a war, normally they're killed off or made into slaves. Eating them seems like another reasonable option to get rid of them, although they probably didn't eat them to kill them off. Like she said, they probably, because eating them to kill them off seems a little strange. They probably just killed them normally, like with spears or something, and then ate them. But yeah, as a food supplement, that seems to be reasonable.
But as a source of nutrition, cannibalism just isn't that efficient. Researchers estimate that while animals such as beavers and boars average 1,800 calories per pound of muscle, humans only carry about 650.
Whoa. Okay, hold on, stop. Wait. let's look at this for a second. First of all, we're focusing on Columbus initially. You'll note the Caribbean islands are not populated by wild boars or beavers, neither of which live there. And in fact, talking about islands in general, you won't see a lot of large mammals, especially once humans occupy the islands as well, because the large mammals get killed off pretty quickly, and you're stuck with small animals and birds. Or, as you find with most island peoples, they have a large diet of fish, which my cursory research shows that the Caribs and other natives during the times of Columbus ate quite a bit of fish. Let's take a look at the caloric to poundage ratio for fish muscle. Now, there's lots of different types of fish. I just picked flounder. I'm not sure why, but common fish to eat. Let's see. Caloric information for 1 ounce, 25 calories per ounce, 16 ounces per pound. That brings us out to about 411 calories per pound. Let's go back and see how that stacks up. 411 calories per pound is even less efficient than those puny humans that are not worth bothering eating. And yet they did quite a bit of fishing. Interesting. And in fact, in this article they talk about this is the one that they reference that talks about cannibalism not being very nutritious. Here we see the human, 146 pounds, 38% muscle, and then the fish is this tiny little block down here, 3 pounds. Of course, fish come in different sizes, 80% muscle. Now, I find that kind of interesting. This is talking about the muscle calories per pound, but a lot of tribal peoples, while muscle and protein is good, are also looking for fat, which has a lot more calories per pound. If I remember my biology, I think it's about 3 times the caloric per pound compared to muscle. Humans have a lot more fat than fish. So again, I don't know if you're going for protein needs or just calories in general. Still, it seems that while humans may not be the most calorically dense, efficient animal to eat, more efficient or more calorically dense than many other animals that tribal peoples spent time and energy hunting.
Think of it as the difference between eating a double bacon cheeseburger with fries and a drink versus just getting the burger in a sad lettuce wrap.
Or not eating at all. Again, if we're talking about eating people who just died in your civilization from old age or whatever, that's just food sitting there and you could choose not to eat it at all. Or if your society fights other tribes, you have a battle and you've got dead bodies, you can eat the dead bodies and have your sad bunless burger, or you could just eat nothing instead.
On top of that, humans are pretty tricky to catch, making us difficult to hunt unless we're already weak or sick.
Wait. Now, when she first said that, I thought the same thing. Like, yeah, humans are pretty tricky. You know, they might fight back. Well, if you think about it, a lot of other animals are going to fight back too. And when you think of humans, really when it comes compared to other animals, humans Humans suck physically. I mean, think about what you showed before. A boar? The boar can outrun you. The boar can smell you coming from far away. Boar can be very and they're strong, powerful animals. They can be kind of hard to catch. Fish, like I mentioned, they live in an inhospitable environment. You can't go into the water and chase them very well. And if you could get into the water and chase them, you're not going to go as fast as they do. They're faster. Birds, islanders eat lots of birds. Birds can fly, and they can fly in roost up in trees in places where humans have a hard time getting. Most of the really easy to catch large mammals like giant sloths and things, and those fought back and were vicious, those would be dead and extinct by this point in time. So really, when you think about it in a way, humans are the easiest animal to catch, or large animal, because of nothing else. When it comes to physical speed, senses, strength, you're on equal footing. When most of the time when you're hunting other animals, you're at a significant disadvantage. The only advantage you have are tools and intelligence. And if you're, again, that's if you consider it as hunting humans. You don't have to go out and hunt them deliberately. If you're eating bodies after a battle or eating bodies that die in your society, you don't have to catch them at all. You've already got the bodies, and you're just finishing them off.
So while humans may be one of the original components of the paleo diet, it just isn't that filling. And like most of the paleo food I see on Instagram, diseased human meat sounds gross.
That's why you wouldn't eat the diseased ones. Remember, fresh after battle maybe, or people who died of old age. You're right. If they died of some horrible disease in your society, you wouldn't eat them. But if they're war prisoners or war casualties, why not? I'm not saying it fits with our current cultural norms, but it seems like it was pretty widespread throughout history. And, when times are desperate, it seems to make sense. And culture evolves with societies as well. So there's nothing wrong with prior cultures doing it. And there's nothing wrong with societies evolving and saying, that's taboo. We're not going to do that anymore.
Okay, so we've established that instances of people eating people are comparatively rare as a dietary measure.
Whoa. I had to stop there earlier because I saw rare and I jumped the gun there. But we haven't established that at all. We've established that eating humans is probably not as efficient as eating mammoths and boars, but and we've shown that it's widespread throughout the world and throughout human history. So I don't think that's been established. And in fact, let's look here. The question was, does cannibalism actually exist as a practice? And her answer is, we've established it's rare as a dietary measure. Why is that what? This isn't proving. This isn't answering the point. We've proven through their own references that cannibalism not only existed, but was common as a practice throughout humanity and most of its history. And she has asserted that it was rare as a dietary measure, but her evidence did not support that conclusion. This is called moving the goalpost. This was what she was trying to show, and she couldn't meet it, and she moved the goalpost back and saying it was rare as a dietary measure, which is not the point, and is irrelevant. And again, like I said, there's nothing wrong with cannibalism. I mean, we can say that it's taboo today, and modern society does not condone it. But this is a moral judgment. And again, morals and cultures evolve over time. And it was fine that previous people did it. And as food became more available, people may not have wanted to eat their forebears or their prisoners or whatever, eat other humans. This is kind of disturbing. And as food now becomes more available as society advances, and we are not on the brink of starvation all the time, they start saying, we're not going to eat people anymore. We've got plenty of food and agriculture and animal husbandry, and we can meet our dietary needs through other means and don't have to resort to this. So I don't know why she's even bothering to move the goalposts. It's fine that people are cannibals, and it's fine that people have evolved out of it. I think we can say that it may indicate that cannibalism was, quote, especially for magical or religious purposes, as our dictionary definition defined here. But even that isn't proven, it's just a possibility.
Which indicates that cannibalism is probably more myth than day-to-day reality.
Whoa. We already said it's widespread and universal. It's not a myth. It may be a myth that it was, cannibal hunters that went after, that deliberately hunted other humans. We haven't shown anything previously about why or how the humans were obtained for it, but cannibalism was certainly practiced.
But what does Christopher Columbus have to do with any of this? When he first accidentally landed in the Caribbean in 1490,
I like how she threw in the accidentally. Again, just little snipes here and there trying to denigrate Christopher Columbus. Now, he did some horrible things. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve criticism, but he's recognized for being explorer and discovering a new land. You can throw the accidentally in there to denigrate him, but really, again, it's just kind of a direct attack, trying to poison the well and make him look worse, and that's not the point of this article.
92, Columbus arrived and met the friendly Arawaks. They promptly said that their enemies, the Caribs, were man-eaters. Now, this was the first recorded meeting of these two groups, so the accuracy of the translation is pretty important to keep in mind. He writes in his journal that he was told, "A long distance from here there are men with one eye and others with dog snouts who eat men." Later, on November 23rd, 1492, Columbus first wrote the word cannibals as another term for the supposedly dog-snouted Carib people. And this is the first instance where the term cannibal is linked explicitly to a group of people who eat people meat.
That's good. I actually learned something. I didn't know that the word cannibal came from the Carib tribes in the Caribbean. And in fact, I was unaware that cannibalism was, I didn't think of the Caribbean as a hotbed of cannibalism, or cannibalism is even really being practiced there. My research after watching this video showed cannibalism was much more widespread than I had thought. So there are some interesting facts here. It's good. Thanks.
Now, based on what he wrote in his journals, at first Columbus wasn't sure if he should believe the Arawaks or not.
So that's good. Columbus is a skeptic. He's got these outlandish claims, and he thinks, I don't know, I haven't heard much about that. It seems a little strange that people have dog snouts and eat other humans, which is interesting because, again, historically, cannibalism seems to have been pretty widespread, but it died out well before Columbus and the colonists started spreading around. So it's interesting to see that it had been so far removed from their cultural norms that they were not expecting it.
However, he eventually became convinced because he met what he described as a really scary, unattractive Carib whose tribesmen attacked his sailors over a trading argument.
Okay, now hold on. This is an important part. We've got a bunch of references, and then she kind of jokes around about what made him change his mind. So let's go back and look at some of the references. This article, How Columbus Created the Cannibals, was one of the ones linked in the video. And let's see, October 12th, just like they said in the video, he describes the first natives he meets as, quote, friendly and well-dispositioned people who bear no arms except for small spears, and they have no iron. Believes he hears stories about warlike people from nearby islands. Interesting, he doesn't mention dog snouts or anything in this one. Dismisses the idea of different natives because, based off his readings, he thinks he's close to China, so he's off course. No problem. A few days later, on November 4th, he interrogates some locals and makes a startling entry. I also understand that a long distance from here, there are men with one eye and others with dog snouts who eat men. On taking a man, they behead him and drink his blood and cut off his genitals. And then 3 weeks later, he's sailing off. He's traveled quite a bit. And the Indians, that he brought Indians with him, which is what he did. He grabs some, takes them with him, again, so he has some translators that can learn the language and can communicate and get some guides as well. But just as the cannibals making an appearance in his log, he hasn't actually met them yet. He's still traveling, and it's 3 weeks later. And it's also important to note, if you look in this article, now we're in December 17th in his log, and it's talking about Columbus's skepticism about the cannibals continuing to grow because of the fantastic stories. So this is not just like, yeah, I'm a little skeptical at first, and then he goes crazy talking about cannibals. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. He's been traveling for a while now, and he still doesn't believe it because the stories he's hearing are crazy. And again, he's got these people on board with him to act as translators, so any communications issues should be being worked out over time. And way down here, on January 13th, so a couple months later now, we've got the incident where he finds this native with a, quote, much uglier face. And, okay, so this guy looks a little different than the others. But not only does he look different, he finds out that the people are very different. Unlike the peaceful people, who he mentioned specifically in his journal were peaceful, this group attack his sailors. And we've already identified them as whether they're like the initial people he met, who were unarmed except for spears. Maybe these guys may have been armed slightly better, but they certainly weren't armed as well as Columbus and his crew. They attack his sailors. So, what did the first natives he met tell him? They said, far from here, there's a violent tribe with dog snouts. And here he is. He's met a tribe that, unlike the other natives, has attacked him. They look different and ugly. Now, what does that mean? Who knows? But at least in Columbus' description, they look different. I don't think he believed the people would actually have dog snouts. But when he sees a group of people look different, and they're violent, and they're far away, he's like, oh, these guys must be the ones I was told about. And these 3 points I was told were all true. I'm not going to go investigate the island, but I've got 3 points out of 3 that are correct. I'm going to assume the 4th point is correct as well, and these people are cannibals. It may be a jump to a conclusion, but at least it was based off of something. There is some logic in his in his decision making. It was not just randomly come about from nothing.
He then decided, without a doubt, the people here are evil. They're from the island of Carib and they eat men. All without seeing them, eat men. Oh, and he thought they were hoarding lots of precious metals.
Now that's a little interesting. Hoarding lots of precious metals. Why didn't she say gold? It's strange because if you had the fact, it should jump out in your mind right away as something's wrong, a discrepancy. Why would she hint at it being gold instead of saying it's gold? Everyone in their minds thinking gold. Columbus wanted gold. The conquistadors wanted gold. If you go back to that reference that she had, you'll see he actually writes, quote, there is a great deal of copper on the island of Carib and on Matinino, but it would be difficult to obtain in the Carib because the people eat human flesh. So that's what. So the important note should be specific. Don't mislead your audience into thinking one thing when you know specifically what it is. You're misleading them into thinking he's plundering them for gold when instead he specifically wrote copper. Just be honest.
On his way back to Spain in 1493, he wrote a letter which was the status update of its day. He said, thus I have found no monsters, nor had a report of any, except in an island, Carib, which is inhabited by people who eat human flesh.
And he may not have seen them eat it, but he was told they ate it. The people fit all the other criteria he was told about. And that would be something that would kind of jump out at you. He was not expecting cannibalism, and that is kind of sensational. It seems reasonable.
This letter was published across Europe and was basically the 15th century equivalent of a viral meme. Short on facts and big on flash.
And this video must be the 21st century of a viral meme. High on flash and low on substance, high on misleading. Oh, well, as of this recording, it's got 1,375 views, so not viral, but maybe just a meme.
In 1494, Columbus went back to the Caribbean, and this time he was cannibal crazy. In his journals, he claims the most populated islands were filled with cannibals.
Okay, we'll skip this next part because I don't necessarily disagree. Basically what she says is Columbus says there's cannibals anywhere. He's got to make a lot of money back because his second voyage and subsequent voyages were larger and needed more funding. He wasn't finding the gold he was expecting, so instead he starts taking people back as slaves. And at first, Queen Isabella is not a big fan of slavery and sends them back, but eventually they start, here's the Pope here, they start using cannibalism as an excuse to overcome their Christian aversion to slavery and genocide so that they can start making more money off this investment of discovering the new world. This part is a little bit interesting, though. Talking about Pope Innocent IV.
Stating that Christians were able to punish cannibalism through brute force, which is a little ironic considering the Catholic Church believed in transubstantiation at the time, which is the idea that people were literally eating the body of Christ and drinking his blood.
So this is another example of trying to disparage, I guess, the Europeans, Catholics in this case, making them look like hypocrites. And there is obviously a difference. Although you could say, in a way, based off our definition up here, a person who eats human flesh, especially for magical or religious purposes. This is a religious service. Well, the Catholic Church Mass would be. They believe, according to their dogma, that that is literally Jesus' body. Although they would say that to all external, the way we look at it and perceive it, it is still bread and wine, but it has magically, religiously been transformed into Jesus' body. They're not actually killing Jesus in this case to get it. And I think that most people can see that there is still, even though technically you might be able to draw a parallel, this bread being transformed into Jesus' body for consumption in religious service is different than eating your fallen captives in battle. Again, just kind of, why is this thrown in here? It's trying to make Europeans look bad.
During communion. So what do we get when we add this all up? Well, it looks like cannibals are real, but in this case, European explorers may have invented them to serve their own purposes.
Okay, and that's a reasonable conclusion. Cannibals are real, they're widespread, but they may have been hyped up so that Europeans could use them as justification for more unsavory actions like genocide and slavery. That's a great point. That's a good statement, and I would agree with that.
Colonial adventurers were grappling with how to deal with native populations. Their base instincts were to dehumanize them to justify forced labor, enslavement, or slaughter. But their professed Christian values of how...
Wait. Why did she say Christian values so strange? She didn't say, but the professed Christian values did not allow them. It's, but their professed Christian values. Maybe I just misheard. Let's try again.
Labor, enslavement, or slaughter. But their professed Christian values of how all
just can't help herself. PBS is a leftist organization, and liberals just, they have to crap on Christianity and Western values. Any opportunity. She can't even say Christian values with a straight face. And hold on a second. Hold on, I just thought of something. Let's listen to this part again. It just dawned on me.
But in this case, European explorers may have invented them to...
European explorers may have invented. This is supposed to be... Remember, she's going to prove this is great facts, or great claims, and great evidence. And she's now backpedaled to it may have shown that it was invented. That just jumped out at me as, again, kind of moving the goalposts and hedging with weasel words. If she's going to make a claim, she's got to stick to her claim and say, here's the claim, here's supporting evidence, the claim has been proven, or I don't have enough evidence to prove it, and make that clear as well. So she goes through a little bit more, talks about how it was used as justification for slavery, and then we come to this.
Especially when you consider modern archaeological evidence has found little to nothing to support claims of cannibalism in the Caribbean.
Did you catch that? Let's go back. We'll try again one more time.
When you consider modern archaeological evidence has found little to nothing to support.
There's a big difference between little and nothing. I would be curious to see what the little is. Because that makes a big... If there's nothing, if modern archaeologists have found no evidence at all whatsoever to support that there was cannibalism in the Caribbean, that would be of interest. It would also be of interest to see if there was little evidence. That means there's some evidence. That means that cannibalism may have been conducted in the Caribbean, but she doesn't show that to us. I don't know why she doesn't show that to us when that's very relevant to the topic, at least in my opinion.
Claims of cannibalism in the Caribbean. Now, there's a certain amount of irony here. Remember at the very beginning of the episode when we said when you think of cannibals, it's probably not white European settlers? Well, turns out a lot of colonists got pretty desperate. Recent evidence has surfaced that the Jamestown colonists in Virginia resorted to cannibalism in 1609. In 1838, crew members of the whaling ship Essex that sailed from Nantucket, Massachusetts, murdered other crew members for food. Additionally, the Donner Party resorted to eating each other during their ill-fated trip to settle the western portion of what is now the United States. So, although
Do you not see the difference in these situations? Cannibals are people who eat human flesh, especially for magical or religious purposes, as among certain tribal peoples. It's a regular course of their existence. It's just part of their culture. It's normal for them. Whether it's for dietary needs or for religious or ceremonial needs, these tribal people eat human flesh as a regular course of daily activity, or weekly, or whatever, how often it is. Those examples you gave are extreme circumstances where people are faced with death due to starvation or cannibalism. And just by the very nature that they are individual written accounts, this event, there's a reason they're recorded, because they're unusual and they stand out. And that's why they've stuck with us through our records in history. When tribal peoples in South America eat people, it's just called Tuesday. It's just normal activity, and there's nothing special about it. That's the difference. This is an attempt to make the white European settlers seem like hypocritical monsters or jerks, and unlike the noble savages that lived in these other countries. It's an attempt to change the balance of reality and skew the viewer's perception, and it's inappropriate. And that's it. The rest of the video is a Q&A from the previous video, it appears. So let's go back and check the questions. Did she prove that cannibalism was, well, the idea of the savage cannibal? We even talk about what the savage cannibal was, really. I think what she was intending to say is that Columbus created the idea of people who actively hunt other people as a food source. I think that was her definition, but that was not what she proved. She didn't link it at all to cannibalism like the paintings at the very beginning of the video, that Columbus started the cannibal craze, and our image of cannibals from those other tribes across the world are based off Columbus's writings and his over-the-top rhetoric. I don't think she really proved any of her point. The only thing that she proved to me was cannibalism is widespread throughout human history, may have been practiced in the Caribbean when I didn't even consider it had been in the past. But I'll agree. The word cannibal probably did come from the Carib tribe. The word cannibal did come from Columbus's writings. There were other terms used for people who eat human flesh historically in the past. You can look at Greek mythology. I mean, there are stories of cannibals in the past, but now we have a set word in stone based off Columbus. Thanks, I guess. I don't think that proves her point, but it does show something, and I did learn something today, so I guess I could thank her for that. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. Bye.